عما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين وضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب عليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يشلكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أأتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالأرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر والليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آيات من آيات ربه إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفيق في السور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغول فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلا تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لتمسن على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فعنا يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مزيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول ولا كافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند مهزرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم يرى الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال ما يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم.
नारे सलवात गुरबत में कत्ल हो गया मज़लूम बेवतन मैं बाई बाई कहती थी लाशा बहन बहन मैं बाई बाई कहती थी लाशा बहन बहन मैं बाई बाई कहती थी लाशा बहन बहन تیروں پہ تھا رکھا ہوا لاشا حسین کا ڈوبا ہوا لہو میں تھا کرتا حسین کا آواز تھی حسین کی بہنا کفن کفن میں بائی بائی کہتی تھی لاشا بہن بہن میں بائی بائی کہتی تھی لاشا بہن بہن میں بائی بائی کہتی تھی لاشا بہن بہن ایک دل پہ داغ میں نے 72 اٹھا لیے کچھ داغ میں نے قلب کے اندر چھپا لیے چھپتے نہیں چھپانے سے داغ رسن رسن میں بائی بائی کہتی تھی لاشا بہن بہن میں بائی بائی کہتی تھی لاشا بہن بہن میں بائی بائی کہتی تھی لاشا بہن بہن دیکھا ہے بابا میں نے جو منظر بتاؤں کیا نیزے پہ تھا رکھا ہوا لاشا سر ہر شہید کا گوروں کے دوڑنے سے ٹکرے بدن بدن میں بائی بائی کہتی تھی لاشا بہن بہن نعرہ صلوات
The moon of Moharam, times of sadness have come. The crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. Betrayal by the coffins, set this moon on its course, calling out for their guide. Treachery with no remorse, Muslim and his sons. What a tragedy, oh what a calamity. The moon bleeds to foresee, the moon bleeds to foresee. The moon of Muharram, times of sadness have come. The crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. On the night they heard the prayers of those pure souls for the rising sun, for perhaps this could be its role. Akbar's adhan so clear, this moon filled with fear. How will it possibly arise and see the state of those there, and see the state of those there? The moon of Moharam, times of sadness have come. The crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. It saw the 6-month infant, no water but a narrow. That night it shone its light on Rabat filled with such sorrow. To see my Oscar I crave, I hear nothing but his cries. Oh son, please do not arise, and with this mother sympathize, and with this mother sympathize. The moon of Moharam, times of sadness have come, the crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. Witnessed it the trampling on Sham-e Ghariba, saw that night the terror, bodies scattered afar, tents looted and on fire, earrings snatched from Ruqayya. This moon also in such pains, this household bound in chains, this household bound in chains. The moon of Moharram, times of sadness have come, the crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. From this month my baby had to wander veilless. Zara's grave is restless for her daughter princess, the cloak of purity for this mother so holy, the beloved of Fatima, paraded in the bazaar, paraded in the bazaar. The moon of Muharram, times of sadness have come, the crescent has now arrived, casting gloom on Karbala, casting gloom on Karbala. Salawat.
Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. चला जो खैमे से मरने रसूल जैसा पिसे, तो पीछे पीछे ये कहते हुए चले सरवर। मुड़ मुड़ के मुझे देखते जाना अली अकबर, मुड़ मुड़ के मुझे देखते जाना अली अकबर। कुछ देर तो जी ले तेरा, कुछ देर तो जी ले तेरा बाबा अली अकबर। मुड़ मुड़ के मुझे देखते जाना अली अकबर। तुम जी से गिरोगे तो बदल जाएगी दुनिया, अरे मक़तल की तरफ कौन हमें लेके चलेगा। कातिल तो बताएंगे ना, قاتل تو بتائیں گے نا رستہ علی اکبر مڑ مڑ کے مجھے دیکھتے جانا علی اکبر ہو جائے گا مشکل میرا آنا میرے بیٹا ارے مقتل میں کہیں دور نہ جانا میرے بیٹا اب مجھ سے چلا بھی نہیں اب مجھ سے چلا بھی نہیں جاتا علی اکبر مڑ مڑ کے مجھے دیکھتے جانا علی اکبر احساس تڑپنے کا ہمارے تجھے ہوتا ارے میری طرح تو اپنا جگر تھام کے روتا تیرا بھی جو ہوتا کوئی تیرا بھی جو ہوتا کوئی بیٹا علی اکبر مڑ مڑ کے مجھے دیکھتے جانا علی اکبر اور نانا میرے پہنچے جو کہا دیر لگائی کہہ دینا اجازت بڑی مشکل سے پائی لگ جاؤ گلے آ کے لگ جاؤ گلے آ کے دوبارہ علی اکبر مڑ مڑ کے مجھے دیکھتے جانا علی اکبر اور نانا گئے جب آئی تھی اماں پہ ضعیفی تم جاتے ہو حالت ہے عجب بنت علی کی ارے زینب ہوئی جاتی ہے زینب ہوئی جاتی ہے ضعیفہ علی اکبر مڑ مڑ کے مجھے دیکھتے جانا علی اکبر اعلان تجھے کرتا ہوں بابا کے حوالے ارے میدان میں ہنستے ہیں کھڑے برچھیوں والے اچھی طرح پھر دیکھ لوں اچھی طرح پھر دیکھ لوں سینہ علی اکبر مڑ مڑ کے مجھے دیکھتے جانا علی اکبر सर पीट के मौला ने तकल्लुम ये सदा दी है चादर ज़ैनब मेरी गुर्बत की गवाही। अरे मैं तुमको कफन दे नहीं, मैं तुमको कफन दे नहीं सकता अली अकबर। मुड़ मुड़ के मुझे देखते जाना अली अकबर। मुड़ मुड़ के मुझे देखते जाना अली अकबर। सूरतुल मुबारकतुल फातिहा।
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Just to let you know that Jamaat Namaz will be held in the marquee if there is no space in the gents hall. Brothers, before we begin the majalis, please can I ask you to stand up and come as close to the front as possible to avoid as many disruptions during the lecture. At the same time, please can we welcome Sheikh Mohammed al-Hilli with the loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Please come close to the front. Any youth or children leaning on the walls, please reserve this for the elderly as well. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله والحمد حقه كما يستحقه حمدا كثيرا. وأعوذ به من شر نفسي إن النفس لأمارة بالسوء إلا ما رحم ربي. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الخلق وخاتم الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين سيدنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المطهرين المكرمين. السلام عليك سيدي ومولاي يا أبا عبد الله، وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. صلوات اللهم صل على. قال الله العظيم في كتابه الكريم وهو أحسن القائلين وأصدق الصادقين: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نحن نقص عليك نبأهم بالحق إنهم فتية آمنوا بربهم وزدناهم هدى آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the purification of the souls, the enlightening of the hearts, the acceptance of the deeds, and for the hastening of the reappearance of the awaited Saviour, Ajjallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif, enlighten your souls and the atmosphere with the recitation of salawat upon Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Respected elders, sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. This is an intriguing and a delicate phase, yet complicated and exhausting when it comes to the life of the human being. It is discussed extensively within the teachings of the religion of Islam. It involves much development and change to one's brain, and there are many lessons to be learnt on how we should approach this phase from the 10th of Muharram. Teenagers and the stage of adolescence is considered to be one of the most challenging parts of the lives of the human being. The word adolescence comes from the Latin, which essentially means to develop or to grow. And the idea that emerges is that many human beings, when they go through this phase, they recognize that there are a number of challenges. Parents see youngsters who are going through teenage years as difficult individuals. We find people beginning to see physiological and psychological developments throughout this important phase. The World Health Organization defines adolescence as people from the age of 10 to 17. Although different individuals and organizations have come forward with different interpretations or age groups. At the same time, we find that this particular time span within the life of the human being is one that is often associated with negativity. Meaning what? Meaning, when you speak to parents, many of them will say, my teen or tween is driving me crazy. In other words, answers back, does not do what I ask him to do. It's a stressful process. Many will say it's exhausting me and I don't know what to do. They say, this child of mine that yesterday was doing whatever I am asking him or her, now it's treating me with a cold response, or is very reserved and I don't know what is happening in their life. And that's why it is stressing many of our parents. Many find parenting adolescents as one of the hardest stages of parenting. That's why one parent famously said that one of the most satisfying moments in my life is to see my children have their own teenagers. Because then they'll be able to see how difficult it was for me. A couple were arguing once on whether to have children or not. The wife was saying, I want to have a dog. The husband was saying, no, we must have children. They went to a marriage counselor. The marriage counselor said to them, you have to choose between that which ruins your carpet or that which ruins your life. In the recognition that there is much negativity related to parenting, but especially teenagers. And there are many who are complaining, or we receive messages asking for help and support to deal with this delicate time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has praised the role of parents. Allah tabarak wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran, many a times Islam emphasizes the reverence and respect to parents. Yet there is an interesting angle that the Quran looks at this. Allah says, قُلْ تَعَالَوْا أَتْلُ مَا حَرَّمَ رَبُّكُمْ عَلَيْكُمْ. Let me tell you what Allah has made haram. Quran says, Allah tushriku bi shay'a. Number one, don't associate any partners with me. وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Then Quran switches. Allah is saying, I'm going to tell you what's haram. what you should not do. Number one, shirk. Then it goes on to talk about lying and killing the innocent human beings. But in the middle, the second thing that the Quran asks, be righteous and virtuous with the parents. This is a style that the Quran utilizes to draw attention to something important, because it doesn't follow the trend. The Quran is saying the following are haram, but then all of a sudden says something that draws the attention of people. And that's why the dua that we often say, وَقُلْ رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا. All this is because of what? It's because of the emphasis on tarbiyah. Many parents out there, unfortunately, are not practicing tarbiyah. They're practicing bringing their children up. There's a difference. There is the idea of nourishing them. There is the idea of giving them what they need physically. But nurturing their skills and qualities and looking to indeed bring out the best amongst them is not necessarily happening. But especially at the teenage years, because of perhaps the lack of understanding of the teenage brain and what kind of development happens in the life of the human being at that particular stage. Don't forget, it is difficult for the parents, but it's also very difficult for the adolescents themselves. Meaning what? Meaning not only do they go through so much development, at the same time their body is changing. Also, there is external pressure. Meaning what? Meaning they have to choose now their careers. There's the element of exams. Then they have peer pressure. All the ideas in society to conform. All the practices around them, especially amongst the Muslim community, that are deemed not acceptable, like taking drugs or illicit relationships, or the continuous battle against the sexualization of children that's happening in the Western world. Let's call a spade a spade. It's happening, and studies are showing that it's happening. The highest teenage pregnancy rate is where? The United Kingdom, in Europe. Why? Because you recognize in studies such as one published in the Telegraph only 2 months ago. What did it say? It came to present the following, that 1.4 million children access online inappropriate material, videos and images that they're not supposed to be seeing. At the same time, 44% of 11 to 16-year-old boys have said that we have had some kind of a relationship, or we are open to a relationship with the opposite gender. In the idea that all these pressures a youth or an individual who is a teenager has to indeed go through. This negativity that exists in the minds of some parents, is it good? Of course not. Because if the outset I look at my teenager and I recognize that this is going not to be a good journey, I'm already setting myself back. If I'm thinking that this adolescent is not going to turn up the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants him or her to do so, I've already given up the battle. Unfortunately, the negative mindset related to teenagers is not helping at all. How many parents here, or parents to be, or inshallah those who have already parented teenagers and maybe can help their grandchildren, how many can stand up and say, I absolutely adore and I enjoy parenting? People would laugh at this. They say, what do you mean enjoy parenting? It's a stressful job, 24 hours a day job, in the recognition that many people see it as a heavy burden on their shoulders. How many people approach parenting with optimism, with positivity, with some form of hope that, you know what, this is a responsibility given to me by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm going to discharge it in the best possible way. And I want to be the most successful as much as I possibly can. This mindset needs to exist between the husband and the wife. And this discussion is of the utmost importance for all ages. Why? Because there are those amongst us who have teenagers. There are those amongst us who have young children who will become teenagers. There are those amongst us who are struggling with people who have passed the age of adolescence, but they need answers. There are those amongst us who will in the future be parents, inshallah ta'ala. The more education and awareness we have, the better we can progress together collectively as a community. Inspired by wonderful teenagers presented in the history of the religion of Islam. Meaning what? Meaning when I discuss adolescence and positive parenting of teenagers, I need to find role models, examples of people who knew how to train and bring up teenagers. You ask me example from the Quran, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. Prophet Ibrahim would come forward, would be raised by whom? By his father. Because we believe his father was upright, monotheistic. And the individual who worshipped idols was his uncle. His father would ensure that Ibrahim alayhi salam was that youth that the Quran praises. Because the word for youth in the Quran is what? Fata. Fata refers to the adolescent age. Ibrahim destroyed those idols when he was 40 or when he was 17. When he saw the community leave, he took it upon himself to act courageously and of course left the axe on the largest one, a story that most of you are very much aware of. Another individual in the Quran who was raised a great teenager is Ismail, raised by his father Ibrahim, whom the Quran praises as a great youth. Ismail alayhi salam submitted to the commands of Allah, did not question the idea that he needs to be slaughtered. He helped his father Ibrahim build the Kaaba, isn't it? One other example the Quran gives us is Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. Prophet Yusuf, a wonderful example of an individual who went through hardships and trials, and Yaqub knew exactly how to deal with a child, raising him up to a wonderful teenager. When it comes to the history of the religion of Islam, we find one amongst the greatest of the teenagers were the Ashabul Kahf. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them and presents them as a role model for you and I. نحن نقص عليك نبأهم بالحق إنهم فتية آمنوا بربهم وزدناهم هدى. Quran says we give you their stories so that you can learn. Why? Because they were youth, adolescents, that they believed in their Lord and we increased them in guidance. These bunch of adolescents and teenagers recognized the danger and therefore submitted to Allah, wanted to save their religion. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala indeed helped them. When it comes to the life of the Holy Prophet, Rasul al-A'zam, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, many people forget that he was an exceptionally gifted, talented, brilliantly inspired teenager. The Prophet of Islam, during those years, what did he do? He took it upon himself in order to earn his living. He would be known as As-Sadiq al-Amin. He would be an individual who would indeed support those who are oppressed and those who are going through injustice. And that's why when he would bring up the individual whom learnt everything from him, أمير المؤمنين ومولى المتقين علي بن أبي طالب صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. We are not surprised that on the day of Uhud, when the Prophet of Islam was fighting so courageously, and let's not forget that, because sometimes we speak about the courage of Amir al-Mu'mineen and somehow belittle the courage of the Prophet of Islam. Because Amir al-Mu'mineen used to say, in the battlefield, when it becomes intense, we will all go behind Rasulullah. Such was the courage of Rasulullah. Let's not forget that we are told on that moment when Amir al-Mu'mineen was fighting alongside the Holy Prophet of Islam, there is a call that's made in the heavens that the Prophet informs Amir al-Mu'mineen, أَلَا تَسْمَعُ نِدَاءَ السَّمَاءِ. Don't you hear all the heavens saying one thing? He said, what do they say? He says, famously, لَا فَتَى إِلَّا عَلِي وَلَا سَيْفَ إِلَّا ذُو الْفِقَارِ. That there is no youth, Ya Ali. That there is no teenager, no youth like Ali ibn Abi Talib, and there is no sword like Dhul Fiqar. I saw a beautiful narration that one day a man came to Medina and he knocked on the door of the Holy Prophet. The Prophet of Islam opened the door, and the Prophet was wearing colorful clothes. So the man said to him, Ya Rasulullah, a'anta al-fata? Are you youth? You're wearing some clothes which are only suitable for adolescents or teenagers. The Prophet looks at him and says, Bala, ana al-fata, wa akhu al-fata, wa ibnu al-fata. I am the youth, who is the brother of the youth and the son of the youth. Yes. He is referring to whom? He is referring to Amir al-Mu'mineen as his brother. Ya Ali. And he is referring to his father who died in his youthful age. Therefore, we find examples in the lives of these holy individuals of people who were teenagers who were excelling in everything. Amir al-Mu'mineen, how did he excel as a teenager? How many of us have studied his life as a child and also importantly as an adolescent? When he was 13 years of age, the Prophet of Islam entrusts him with one of the biggest responsibilities: prepare food for 3 consecutive days for the heads of Quraysh. This was a 13-year-old who indeed embraced that responsibility that was given to him by the Holy Prophet of Islam and did tremendously well, isn't it? He would stand to defend Rasulullah those difficult years in Mecca. It really shaped his personality. Those teenage years of Ali ibn Abi Talib were very special. And that's why I'd like to look at this subject by asking a number of important questions. Number one, before parenting teenagers, what should parents do? Number two, what happens to the brain of a teenager? And number three, as a result, what should parents think about when they go through this important step-by-step journey? Number four, very importantly, what is the subject or an area that is affecting teenagers in our communities and societies in the Western world quite frequently in this day and age? And what is our position? Number five, what are some Islamic recommendations for the upbringing of teenagers and those who are going through the stages of adolescence? And number six, what glowing examples can we see in Karbala from wonderful teenagers who were inspired by Sayyid al-Shuhada, Aba Abdullah al-Hussain, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. If we can ask you please to come forward as much as possible so that we can begin the discussion. Please rise and walk forward in order to make space, and may Allah reward you for every step that you make towards me as much as possible. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And this salawat is not salawat of those Hussainis who are seeking the passion of Karbala and Ashura. A second salawat. To honor the teenager and the man we are remembering today, Ali Akbar, the third loud salawat. You're driving me crazy is a sentence that many parents say to their teenagers, in the recognition that many say, where do we begin when it comes to dealing with our youth at this age? They make life very difficult for us. The first element that many of us need to look at before looking at our adolescent teenagers is ourselves. Meaning what? Meaning that if you pick up any book today that speaks about parenting, especially from the perspective of the religion of Islam, there is the idea that the biggest role models for our children and our youth are the parents themselves. If you and I, as parents, as husband and wife, as mother and father, make an effort to indeed scrutinize what we do, this sets us in a very good position when it comes to parenting our young children as well as our teenagers. What do we mean? Many a times, parents come forward and do certain things, yet they ask their children to do completely opposite. I have received messages that people say, teenagers say, my parents are hypocrites. They tell me to pray on time, but they pray last minute before it's qadha. They tell me don't watch haram, but I know in Netflix what they're watching. They tell me don't lie, but they are the first to lie if it suits their life. You and I must be of the individuals who recognize that the Quran says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, lima taquluna ma la taf'alun. Kabura maqtan inda Allahi an taqulu ma la taf'alun. Oh, you who believe, why is it that you say things but you don't do it? This is great in the eyes of Allah. that there is this hypocrisy, dichotomy in the personality of certain individuals. Rest assured, if parents were to lead by example, if they were both reading from the same sheet, can't say singing, when they're both reading from the same sheet, what do we say? They will both indeed help each other in making the best example presented for their children, without a shadow of a doubt. That's why I remember some of the youth out there have gone even to the extent of come out online. One I saw said, I want to sue my parents. I said, why? I said, they did not take my permission before bringing me into this world. There are people, teenagers, who have reached a point, their relationship with their parents are such that they've even now been in the position that they don't want to even exist due to the stress that is involved in the whole process. Now, what is interesting is that you and I are told parents primarily need to reparent themselves before parenting their teenagers. Please understand this term. Perhaps you may not have come across. In clinical psychology, there is a process known as reparenting. This is not what we're talking about. Reparenting involves the parent looking at themselves and somehow drawing back from their childhood on issues that they're still carrying themselves, and it's affecting the way they parent their own children. Meaning what? That sometimes in our childhood, may Allah bless our parents and our grandparents, they may have not conducted or done something in the right way because they believe that they should parent the way they were parented. And sometimes this creates some form of trauma for certain individuals, or there are needs of children that are not being fulfilled. There are people out there today, for example, who were children. When they went through grief, their parents did not necessarily give them the empathy or the compassion or sat to listen to how they feel. And that's why they would need to, for example, reparent themselves. There are those, when they were children, they really wanted something, but their parents said, you will never have it. And it was forbidden for them, something that's halal. Now, when they're older, they're forcing their children to have it because they didn't have it. And there are those who think that they have to parent their teenagers the way they were parented. That's not always something that will bring good positive results. Meaning what? Reparenting is to assess our childhood and to go through a journey individually, perhaps with our siblings, with those that we lived with, to try and restructure the way that we were brought up. Perhaps not necessarily all were good, some of the aspects were good, but I need to re-examine some of the techniques. Let me give you examples. There are 4 destructive parenting styles. Please pay attention, because this will help you, inshallah ta'ala. These 4 styles are used today, and I have seen it myself when I deal with family issues throughout the last 15 years. When I sit with parents, when I sit with children and teenagers, I see these 4 destructive parenting styles in place. Number 1, it's called shaming style. Meaning what? Every single time the parent looks at their teenager and say, how dare you? Don't you have any shame? How could you be such a thing? How can you go ahead and do such a thing? This shaming, unfortunately, what does it do? Destroys self-confidence. It brings down the child, makes them feel so low, especially when it happens in front of others. The parents are thinking, well, I'm putting him or her straight. I'm making them stronger. But in actual fact, you're destroying their personality. The second type, and each of these requires an extensive discussion, but I'm just giving the tip here. The second type is called cuddling. Cuddling means what? When you see, for example, your teenage daughter, she is not praying, she's 14. You come to her and you say, if I buy you the latest Liverpool shirt, would you pray?
Definitely not.
Yes? Would you do that? That kind of cuddling means what? It means that I somehow bargain constantly with my children that if they do something, I will reward them with something else. And that in itself is also destructive. Why? Because if I'm constantly doing this all of my life, and especially during the teenage years, that's how their mindset will always be, that I will only do things if people reward me. The idea of ikhlas and sincerity goes out the window. I'm not against rewards. There is a space and a position for rewards, but it's not all the time, and it's not a parenting style. Similarly, there is another destructive parenting style called authoritarian parenting style. Please understand this, because this is very common. The authoritarian parent does what? Indeed makes all the decisions themselves. when it comes to the child, and approaches the child with the mindset that if you don't do something, you will be punished. At the same time, does not involve the child in the decision making at all. It's my way or the highway. And there are many examples. For example, if somebody who is not wearing a hijab, a child who's not wearing a hijab, an 11-year-old girl, the father comes and says, if you don't wear hijab, then I will not give you pocket money. Or if you don't wear hijab, I will prohibit you from seeing your friends. There are sometimes positions for this to be applied, but if it is a majority parenting style, meaning that it's always something that takes place, it becomes problematic. I'll tell you why in a minute. The fourth problematic parenting style, it's called permissive style. Permissive means what? Permissive is when you come, and this is now on the rise. What's happening now? You see your child who's not doing what you want them to do. And you look at them and say, don't worry. As long as you're happy, I will do it for you. That you only deal with them exclusively with love, with no boundaries. What happens if you're an authoritarian parent or a permissive parent? When the child becomes a teenager, the authoritarian parent and the permissive parent see a shock in their lives. Why? Because the authoritarian parents who wants to see their child being exactly like them will see that the child will be so withdrawn, they will not even communicate with them because you haven't given them the confidence, you haven't listened to them, you haven't shown an interest in their opinion, so they will withdraw. The permissive parent, they will see what? They will see the individual that they showed exclusive love towards will now become arrogant, will answer back, and will constantly expect what they used to have when they're a child. What should I be looking to do as a parent? What's a successful parenting style? This is very important that we recognize this particular style. I call it the PCAP. Sounds like a glue or something. But PCAP is very important that we remember this particular idea. This is the idea of an individual who is connected to their children. And they're authoritative. And at the same time, they are positive. The positive, connected, authoritative parent, PCAP. What does this involve? Today's studies have shown the biggest problem, and please mark these words and understand it. The biggest problem parents face when it comes to teenagers is the lack of connection with them. They can't connect. Parents are on a different planet and teenagers are on a different planet. Why? Because perhaps they've been raised only with do's and don'ts. Do this, have you done this? Why haven't you done this? Make sure you do this. That's it. Parents haven't shown a genuine interest in their children. When they come to the age of teenage, what do? They are seen to be as necessary just to be there. Parents are seen that you just have to provide for me. Where do these teenagers and adolescents find the connection? Instagram, friends, because they see those individuals are genuinely interested in them. They listen to them, they talk to them, they communicate with them. Communication and connection is seen today as the biggest factor in a successful parenting. Why? Because you create that bond, you develop that affinity, you build that trust with your son or daughter. And this requires so much hard work before teenage life. When they're young, when they're going through this first phase in the hadith that says that the child goes through 3 phases, from 0 to 7, 7 to 14, 14 to 21. The hadith of the Ma'sumin say 14 to 21 is when they become your friend. How do they become your friend? In the idea that friends do what? Give advice to each other, confide in each other. I ask you, today teenagers, do they come to their parents when they've made a mistake or when they've committed something wrong? I'll tell you, in Iraq, as an Iraqi, I'll tell you what the teenagers are afraid of. They're afraid of one thing, the sandals. That's what they're afraid of. If I'm going to come and confide in my father that, for example, I have this particular crush or I love this particular lady person and I have these feelings, what will my father do to me? I'm going to say, let me sit down, let's talk about it. Yes. Usually either it's that or the belt that comes out. in the recognition that that connection needs to be worked on. And it requires the parents to research, to develop, attend workshops, courses, read books. How do I connect with my adolescent child, with my teenager? I'll give you one or two tips. One of them is called listening tools. Meaning what? That the parent sits and without interrupting their teenage son or daughter, listens for 3 minutes, tries to understand, tries to put themselves in their position, not necessarily offering solutions, but rather giving them responsibility and asking them, what do you think should happen? How do you think we should solve this problem? Rather than immediately rushing with solutions and looking ideally for long-term rather than short-term fixes. Many a times parents see that the best way to deal with situations and hard times is when they are conflict with their children or their teenagers, is to immediately remedy the situation. Imagine, I'll give you examples so that it's not all theory. A parent looks at their teenage son. They're wearing a particular shirt that they absolutely hate. The father looks at the son. There are now wrong parenting styles when it comes to this. The wrong parenting styles means what? I look at the child or the teenager and I say, how could you? Don't you have any shame? Take that shirt off right now. I will not allow you to wear it in public. That's one style. Another style comes forward and says, my dear son, Quran, dear, ya bunay, I love you and I respect you. This shirt I don't like, but I know Islamically it's okay. But if you think it's okay, you can wear it. Now you might come and say, but listen, how could this be? Surely a parent should enforce their opinion on their children. Who says? As long as, for example, when it comes to an area where there is flexibility for the parent to be able to navigate through certain situations that are not anti-Islamic, but rather the ability to evolve in the child or the adolescent mind, the idea of decision making, because the brain of this particular young boy or girl is going through huge development. And this you and I need to understand, because many a times when we approach these youngsters, we don't know what's happening in their brain. There is a brain expert by the name of Dr. Dan Siegel. Dr. Dan Siegel has written 15 books on the mind, the brain, child development, and so on. So he's an expert. He's a clinical psychologist. He has come forward and he has said, during the teenage years, there is a remodeling of the brain. There is a development going on. And he gives a simple example. He says, if you are planting a tree, imagine the tree grows and it has branches and it has leaves. All of a sudden, the tree decides that the branches will lose all its leaves because it needs a new leaf formation. He calls this pruning. What happens in the prefrontal cortex, the frontal part of the brain, is that there is a huge change that takes place during the adolescent years. Why? This is purposefully made by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that the teenager can now specialize and begin to choose and make distinctive decisions and identify themselves as something. Now, this pruning is necessary so the teenager makes difficult decisions. At the same time, he says there is what's known as myelin formation. Myelin formation is what? Myelin formation is something which is a sheath that covers the neurons that makes them communicate much better and much faster. What this does to the brain is it enables now the brain to make decisions quicker, and it helps with what's known as neuroplasticity. Too many technical terms, but it's important. The brain of the teenager is now going through so much change for the betterment, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is getting them ready into adult life. That's why he goes on to say there are certain behaviors of teenagers which parents are usually unhappy with, but can be explained through the brain. For example, teenagers at those ages are looking for some form of novelty seeking. Meaning what? Meaning they're looking for something which is somehow risk taking. They are sensitive to criticism. They want to try new things. If a parent doesn't know that the teenage brain naturally is tending towards this, they think the child or the teenager is rebellious. And that's why it's of the utmost importance that the parent, for example, knows the love language of the son or the daughter. Meaning what? There are 5 ways that they would like to receive love. Sometimes it's through words. Sometimes it's through acts of service. Sometimes it's through quality time. Sometimes it's through gifts. And the idea, sometimes it's through physical touch. That when the parent knows that the child needs something at that delicate age, they can respond. Likewise, they could support ideas and initiatives. Notice that the Prophet of Islam, Rasul al-A'zam Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, what did he do? He gave important responsibilities to whom? To the youth. He gave important responsibilities to teenagers, like whom? Mus'ab ibn Umayr, radwanullahi ta'ala alayh. This man who was martyred in Uhud, he was 17 or 18 when the Prophet sent him to Medina and said to him, go and deliver the message of Islam. Notice, the Prophet of Islam is empowering the youth. He's saying, no, you go. I'm not concerned about your age. I'm going to develop you. And he was a tremendously important person, which caused the people of Yathrib to embrace Islam. And there's others, Usama ibn Zayd, Amir al-Mu'mineen himself, and many others who are at a teenage age, but the Prophet of Islam recognized their potential. Yes? That's why, for example, this particular scholar, Dan Siegel, says, one more, he says what? He says there is an increased emotional intensity amongst the teenagers because of what's happening in the brain. That means what? They don't like to be criticized often, and at the same time, sometimes they're very moody. They switch off all of a sudden. Sometimes they could be happy in the morning, but very much distraught in the evening. So parents, don't take it personally. Parents, understand this, yes? Show empathy, show love. The most important factor in creating that connection is to express love, but with boundaries. Without shadow of a doubt, this is very important. When we come to one of the major challenges that our youth and our teenagers are facing in this day and age, it's a sensitive subject without shadow of a doubt, but requires a few minutes of your attention for us to shed light on it. And that is the bombardment of the teenage brain with the LGBTQ movement. This is unfortunately prevalent in the Western world, and it's becoming more of an issue and a challenge as day by day goes. Meaning what? Meaning many of our youth are now confused. They're looking at this and they're asking themselves, is Islam somehow able to accommodate homosexuality? Is it something that Islam somehow agrees with? What is the position of the religion in regards to Muslims who say that they're gay, for example? These questions have been presented. Why? Because the exposure out there today is not like how it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. There is a systematic normalization and attempt to draw sympathy with regards to this particular practice, and the notion of ensuring people must, shoving it down people's throats, so to speak, and making people somehow in a position that must be accepting of this in schools, during Pride Month, at the workplace, and so on and so forth. And that's why, what do you find? You find today, indeed, some statistics and some of those individuals who have seen what's going on, quite shocked. For example, from the movies that were made in 2019, 18% of them involved LGBTQ characters. Last month, a 8-year-old girl in a school in North London was warned. A letter was sent to her parents and she was taken to an area in order to be spoken about, because the only thing she said was homosexuality was a sin. That's it. She was taught by her parents that it was a sin, and I think she was a Catholic. In the recognition that today books are available everywhere, in libraries, in schools, in public places, and they're being given to our children. And quite interestingly, I came across this book that I ordered, and it will return to Amazon. But I ordered this book, which is called This Book is Gay. Okay? Now you might be laughing about this, but there is a very dangerous thing inside. Some of you may have come across. If you look inside, what do you find? You find a page that says, How to Argue with Muslims. Let me read to you what it says so that you know what's been out there. The page before says Islam. A little like the Bible, there is an awful lot in the Quran to explicitly forbid homosexual behavior. Not an awful lot in the Quran to explicitly forbid homosexual behavior. Although it also refers to the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. This time with a more explicit focus on rape, not homosexuality. Then in this page, when it says how to argue with Muslims, says the good news is the Quran is on your side. Nowhere is put in capital. Nowhere in there does Allah state a punishment for homosexual behavior. What's more, the Quran actively encourages diversity, as Allah created that too. Regarding the hadith, there are various rules that very few people would follow today. It says, yes. Moreover, the Sharia law sets no specific punishment for homosexual behavior. Most Muslim countries don't enforce these punishments. These kind of publications are now being circulated, and the target of the Muslim community, in order for Muslim community to accept this particular idea. What is it that they're trying to force? It's an identity, and an identity must be accepted. Where does the religion of Islam lie in this particular idea? What do we say? We don't believe that this practice is an identity. It's a behavior. We will not accept that it's an identity. Because when you look at the history of the term homosexuality, it doesn't even exist in the Quran, or doesn't even exist in hadith literature. This idea of homosexuality was coined only 100 or 150 years ago. And it wasn't there before that. And it was trying to study same gender physical relations. The idea that exists out there today is the religion of Islam comes forward and says, homosexuality is looked at like any other act which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden, such as adultery, such as fornication, such as drinking of alcohol. Why is it that an individual who drinks alcohol is not identified as an alcoholic walking in the street? Excuse me, I'm an alcoholic. No one says that. Whereas if you practice homosexuality, you need to be acknowledged as a homosexual person, or as a lesbian or gay or bisexual or whatever. Yes? The idea that exists today is most of our youth don't know how to answer these kind of stuff mentioned in these kind of books. Let me give you an example. If this book is saying, and many others are saying, Islam does not have a position because the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, Prophet Lut, were punished because they raped men. It was not because of the very act of what? Of seeking the same gender in the physical relationships. How do we answer? Yes, we answer back by saying the following. Allah says in the Quran in chapter 11:78, قال يا قوم هؤلاء بناتي هن أطهر لكم. Lut alayhi salam, when those people came seeking the angels that were in the form of human beings, what did Lut say to them? He says, "O people, here are my daughters. They are better for you." I ask you, if those people were being punished for rape, would Lut say, "Here, take my daughters and rape them"? Is that how it would be? What logic states that an individual presents his own daughters or the women of the community to say you can rape them, if this was all about rape? At the same time, we have in the Quran chapter 7 verse 81, Lut says, إِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالَ شَهْوَةً مِّن دُونِ النِّسَاءِ. You, O people, approach men with desire instead of women. Meaning what? If this was rape, Lut wouldn't say that you, instead of women, you are raping men instead of women. That means he's saying it's okay to rape women. How can this be accepted? And what about the world of hadith literature that individuals like this particular author and others are trying to indeed dismiss? Today, what we need to have in this discussion of the utmost importance, we need to develop safe areas for our youth to be able to have discussions on this subject. Meaning what? Meaning there are people today, unfortunately, within our communities who have these kind of feelings. And people are asking a question, what do we do? Are they allowed to come to mosque? There are those who are transgender. Islamic jurisprudence is now having to deal with so many of the fiqh rulings relating to them. The idea that emerges is, do we have safe spaces for these people? Where do they turn to? How do they find answers? These are all pivotal questions that we should be looking to answer. For example, there is an organization, one of our friends from the Shia community, Strong Support Foundation, yes, that he has organized, that helps individuals who have those feelings from within the Muslim community, so that they can have these discussions, because we must make a distinction between those who have feelings and those who act upon the feelings. Those distinctions are pivotal and important. At the same time, we must provide individuals in our communities who may be going through this with support. In what sense? There are, for example, podcasts and books written for Muslims, from people that we trust, who can indeed guide them to understand that such practice is not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala indeed endorses. But ultimately, for the teenager, and please understand these words, ultimately what involves is the recognition that who interprets Quran and Hadith. I ask you, today teenagers will come and say, oh, but hijab is not found in the Quran. Oh, but Allah doesn't say the punishment of homosexuality in the Quran. Oh, but this or this. Do you know where they've taken it from? TED Talks, YouTube, podcasts. Do we take Islam from those sources or not? The invitation for parents is to bring them back to the source, to the essence, to the original roots, Quran and Ahl al-Bayt, as presented to us by our ulama and maraja. That's the invitation. We need to be able to empower our youngsters to now understand who is it that defines what's allowed in the religion of Islam or not. And where do we seek guidance in this particular regard? And that's why the important question that we have to ask today, and that is, what kind of tips are presented to us so that we can be effective parents for our teenagers? The first thing to remember is the Quranic denotion of the idea of izzah. Meaning what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ فَلِلَّهِ الْعِزَّةُ وَلِرَسُولِهِ وَلِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. There is a special power that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given believers. Today, amongst our teenagers, there is a lack of self-belief. There is sometimes, unfortunately, the lack of self-recognition of their worth, and therefore they seek it elsewhere. Each and every one of us has a responsibility to ensure that that izzah is passed on to that teenager. That young man or woman who stands to perform their salah, who stands to perform and do their duties, who wears the hijab as far as females are concerned, comes to the majlis, is indeed reciting the Quran and dua, taking part in azadari and ziyarah, needs to be praised. That individual, yes, needs to be supported, because these things are not easy in this current day and age. It is of the hardest matters to sometimes adhere to their religion. But there are, amongst a number of things, problems that we see practiced by some of our teenagers that parents need to be aware of. That involves haya and iffa. Please understand these final points. What do we mean? We mean today, when we look at some of our teenagers' presentations on TikTok and on Snapchat and on social media, it leaves a lot to be desired. Wallah. And I cannot even begin to imagine how the Holy 12th Imam would feel when he sees some of our boys and girls presenting themselves in such a manner. That the idea of haya, meaning positive shame, that I am embarrassed before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The idea of iffa. Iffa means what? Amir al-Mu'mineen wa Mawla al-Muttaqeen, Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. He says, لا حياء لمن لا دين له ولا دين لمن لا حياء له. If you don't have this positive shame, you have no religion, Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen says. This haya and iffa means what? It means the haya is the internal shame. Iffa means the positive, outwardly shame. That I am aware of how I conduct myself, how I dress up, what I say, the words that I use in public. Because I'm a believer. Whether I like it or not, I am an ambassador of Ali Muhammad. I am carrying the badge of Ja'far ibn Muhammad. I am a Ja'fari. I am a believer. Therefore, I must present them and represent them in the best way. I'm not just any individual who can do whatever I wish. And therefore, as a teenager, we need to be able to bring those basic principles back into their lives. How do we do that? Without a shadow of a doubt. A key component is to rekindle the love and the wilaya of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad salawatullahi wa salamu alayhim ajma'in. May Allah bless the soul, Ya Ali, of this great individual by the name of Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali, a companion of Amir al-Mu'mineen. One day he comes home and he finds his teenage girl consuming honey. He asks her, "Where is this honey from? I didn't buy it." She said, "Muawiyah sent it and said it's a gift for you. Someone came on the door and said it and gave it to us." He looks at her. Did he punish her? Did he take away from her and say, "How dare you," and shame her? He looked at her and says, "My dear daughter, can you imagine an individual who consumes poison?" She says, "That's disastrous for the human being." He said, there are enemies of the Ahl al-Bayt that provide something which would outwardly look sweet, but in itself it's poison. When she clocked that Muawiyah is trying to remove the love of Ali, she would forcefully vomit the honey out. Then she looked at his father and said, "Oh father, wallah, no one can take the love of Ali away from my heart." Ya Ali. The recognition therefore today is, when we, for example, have these wonderful majalis throughout the year, not only the first 12 nights of Muharram, where is the presence of our teenagers and our youth? Number one. Number two, when we have Sha'air al-Husayniyah, Sha'air means rituals that reminds us of the Aza of Abu Abdullah, things that make us connected to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, such as the taboot, such as the alam, such as the ma'tam, such as the weeping and the crying, such as these expositions like this wonderful exhibition that we have here in Hyderi and others. Are we individuals that lead by example when it comes to our youth and our teenagers? Yes, we need to answer their questions. They may come forward and say, "Why should I kiss that taboot? Why should I respect that alam? Why should I take part in ma'tam?" Maybe you need to be able to understand that they're surrounded by individuals who are trying to take them away from the love of Ali Muhammad. They're trying to reduce the connection with these holy individuals. I have a responsibility those years to enhance that relationship. That relationship can be enhanced in so many different ways. One of them is to encourage their participation in ziyarah, is to encourage their participation in acts of worship, is to bring them to the mosque, is to discuss with them specifically any areas that they may have concern regarding the practices of the school of Ahl al-Bayt, and not to dismiss any of their misconceptions or ideas that exist in their mind, and to provide them with a safe space to do so, and to present them with wonderful role models that they can look up to in their path towards perfection and seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you come to Karbala, you will truly see example after example of teenagers who indeed mastered this servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and today can become wonderful role models for each and every one of us, especially those who are going through adolescence. The idea is, you look at people, for example, who are mentioned in historical records. You look at, for example, the other sons of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. Often we don't talk about them. There is one son of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam by the name of Abdullah al-Akbar. He was also a teenager. He attained martyrdom on the day of Ashura, fighting alongside the companions and the family of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. You find, for example, a man by the name of Abu Bakr, the son of Amir al-Mu'mineen. His real name is Muhammed, but he was given the title Abu Bakr. He was also a teenager or a man in his 20s, fought courageously, attained Shahada on the day of Ashura. And of course you find great teenagers looking up to a man whom of course had passed perhaps the age of adolescence, but was an embodiment of the courage and the beauty of Rasulullah, Ali al-Akbar. And what can be said about this beautiful human being? I ask you, on the plains of Karbala, there was only one man whom Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam accepted his request for permission to fight. And that must have been one of the most difficult moments for Sayyid al-Shuhada. Because this Ali al-Akbar oozed with wisdom, foresight, because on the way to Karbala, we are told when Imam alayhi salam was riding, Ali al-Akbar was also riding, Imam stops for a minute. Ali al-Akbar is so alert. He looks at Imam al-Hussein. He says to him, "Father, is everything okay?" He says, I nodded off for a few minutes, and I can see in my dream death approaching towards us. That courage of Ali al-Akbar would come out at all times. He would say to his father, "Father, we are not worried if death comes towards us or we go towards death." How reassuring these words are for Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, that his oldest son would be saying such words of positive encouragement, of courage and valor. That's why when he stood on the day of Ashura before Abu Abdullah, Imam alayhi salam did one thing. Do you know what Imam did? He said to him, "Bunay Ali, ilayya ilay. I want you to come closer to me." Why? Ashummuka wa tashummuni. I want to embrace you. I want to hug you. I want to kiss you. This is the farewell. The riwayat say when they hugged, they collapsed onto the ground because both were shedding the tears. They knew this is the farewell. They knew that this would be where they would indeed say their goodbyes to each other. The moment Ali al-Akbar went towards the battlefield, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam raised his hands towards the heavens. He made that monumental, brilliant dua. He says, "Allahumma shhad ala ha'ula'i al-qawm. فلقد برز إليهم غلام أشبه الناس برسولك محمد صلى الله عليه وآله خلقا وخلقا ومنطقا." Ya Allah, bear witness against these people. The man who's just emerged on the battlefield reminds everyone and resembles Rasulullah in his appearance, in his akhlaq, and in the way he speaks. And every time we wanted to remember Rasulullah, we looked at him. Imam al-Hussein said, "Ya Allah, punish them for what they are about to do." Imam al-Hussein prays against the killers of Ali al-Akbar because he knows the value of Ali al-Akbar in his life. Ali al-Akbar goes towards the battlefield. He fights like a true warrior. People said, "We did not identify him as Ali, the son of Hussein. We saw him as Ali ibn Abi Talib." This valor, this chivalry, this commitment was something that Karbala witnessed. Friends and foes stood in awe and admiration for Ali al-Akbar at that moment. But I ask you, mothers, their hearts are special when it comes to their children. They always want to somehow feel the presence of their sons and their daughters. How hard it was, as some narrations point to Layla being in Karbala, for the mother of Ali al-Akbar to bid farewell for her son. But obviously she wanted him back. She wanted to see him one more time. She looked at Rasulullah, she looked at the holy Imam. Imam looked at her. She said, "Ya ibn Rasulillah, is there a way that Ali al-Akbar would return?" Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says, "The dua of the mother is answered by Allah. Go and pray. Maybe Allah will answer your dua." Layla goes inside the tent. She sits inside the tent, removes her hijab, sits on the prayer mat. You know what dua she asked? What would you ask Allah? Those moments of hajat, you're desperately wanting your son to come back. She knows exactly what to say. She says, "Ilahi bi ghurbati Aba Abdullah." Oh Allah, Hussein is alone in the plains of Karbala by the sake of the fact that he is all alone. Oh, the one who returned Yusuf to Yaqub, return my son Ali for me. The narration says Ali al-Akbar was fighting. A man comes towards him. Imam al-Hussein is worried that that man might hurt him. Yet Ali al-Akbar dismisses him and kills him. and returns back to Aba Abdullah. When he returns to his father, he looks at him. Imam al-Hussein looks at him. There is a request that Ali al-Akbar has, but he doesn't know how to ask it, but he has to ask it. He says, Father, Father, is there any drops of water? Imam al-Hussein at the moment looks at his son. He says, my dear son Ali, may Allah give you patience. In a few moments you'll meet your grandfather Rasulullah, who will quench your thirst from the pond of Kawthar. One narration says that Ali al-Akbar looked at his father and looked at the dry lips of Aba Abdullah, and Imam would say to him, I wish I could give you some saliva from my mouth so that your thirst will be quenched. But oh my son Ali, your mother is asking for you. She is wondering where you are. Ali al-Akbar goes towards the tent. He enters the tent. Notice that sight. Imagine your heart's in Karbala tonight. He goes and sits next to his mother. Now she's passed out. She's unconscious because of the crying. The riwayah says Ali begins to shed the tears, and the tears fall on the cheeks of his mother Layla. She then wakes up. Am I in a dream? This is Ali once again. He has returned. Oh, my son Ali, let me see you for the final time. Allow my eyes to be filled with your vision. Let me finally just get to see you. I ask you, oh Layla, why did you want to see Ali in this state? Perhaps she knew in a few moments she'll see the bruised, torn body of Ali al-Akbar. Allahu Akbar. This time, Ali al-Akbar returns to the battlefield for the final time. When he is fighting courageously, a man comes from behind and strikes him with a sword on his head. When Ali al-Akbar falls onto the horse is blinded by the blood of Akbar. So the horse takes him even further to the enemy campsite. They now surround this young man. One person stabs him with a dagger, another stabs him with a spear, a third person strikes him with a rock. Then he falls onto the ground. He calls out, Alayka minni salam, Abatah ya Aba Abdullah. Oh Father Hussain, look at where I am, Father, Father. The poet describes this beautifully. He says Aba Abdullah was about to leave, but he went the complete opposite direction. His daughter would say to him, Sukaina, Father, Father, my brother Ali is this way. He would say, my daughter, you don't know how my heart is broken. I've lost the sense of direction. Where do I go? Imam al-Hussein reaches where Akbar is found. He sits next to him. He looks at him. He begins to cry. He says, Bunay Ali ala dunya ba'daka al-afa. Oh my son Ali, what is the value of this world without you? What a line from Aba Abdullah. This was how much Ali al-Akbar meant to him. He says, this world is not worth living when you're not around. But Ali al-Akbar was doing something unusual. Now Imam al-Hussein looks at him. Can you imagine? He's holding his head. There is blood everywhere. His body is torn into pieces. Abu Abdullah is trying to console him in the last moments. But Ali al-Akbar is thinking about something. Imam looks at him. Ali al-Akbar is smiling. Then he looks towards his left, and then he is seen distressed. Imam says to him, tell me, my son, what is it that you can see? Ali al-Akbar says, Father, on my right is Rasulullah. He has quenched my thirst. But on my left is my grandmother Fatima. What is she doing? Ya Fatima, Ya Zahra. Exactly what is she doing? Oh, Aba Abdullah, she is slapping her cheeks. She is saying, Wa Hussaina. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. يا حسين.
کہتی تھی ماں خو بھری میں یاد سے لپٹ کر ہے علی اکبر ہے علی اکبر ارمان تھا پہناؤں گی پوشاک شہانی افسوس کے راس آئینہ تجھے کو یہ جوانی کیسا تھا مقدر ہے علی اکبر ہے علی اکبر ارے اتنا تو ذرا ٹھہرو تمہیں دولہا بنا لوں پھر ایک جھلک سحر کی صغرا کو دکھا لوں بے چین تھی خواہش ہے علی اکبر ہے علی اکبر ماں تیری جدائی میں بھلا کیسے جیے گی مر جائے گی صغیرہ جو خبر تیری سنے گی اب کیا کروں جی کر ہے علی اکبر ہے علی اکبر اور 18 برس پال کے پروان چڑھایا وہ گے سو والا ہے میرا خون میں نہایا یہ کیا ہوا دلبر ہے علی اکبر ہے علی اکبر تم ہچے کیا لے کے جو دم توڑ رہے ہو موما سے ہمیں شاہ
کے لیے موڑ رہے ہو، کیوں روتے ہو دلبر؟ ہائے ہائے علی اکبر، ہائے ہائے علی اکبر۔ ارے پہلے تو ایک آواز پہ اٹھ جاتے تھے بیٹا، اب اتنی صداؤں پہ بھی پہلو نہیں بدلا، کیا ہو گیا دلبر؟ ہائے ہائے علی اکبر، ہائے ہائے علی اکبر۔ ہائے ہائے جوان اکبر جوان، ہائے ہائے جوان اکبر جوان، ہائے ہائے جوان اکبر جوان، ہائے ہائے جوان اکبر جوان۔
زخم دل کے دکھاؤں میں کیسے، زخم دل کے
دکھاؤں میں کیسے،
تیرا لاشا اٹھاؤں میں کیسے اکبر، میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر، میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر، میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر، میرا سحر والا اکبر۔ لاش اکبر پہ شاہ جب پہنچے، دل کو ہاتھوں سے تھام کر بولے، تیری فرقت نے علی اکبر آگ دل میں میرے لگا دی ہے، آگ دل کی بجھاؤں میں کیسے، آگ دل کی بجھاؤں میں کیسے، تیرا لاشا اٹھاؤں میں کیسے اکبر، میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر، میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر، میرا سحر والا اکبر۔ دیکھ آیا ہے قاصد صغرا، راہ تک تھی ہے وہ دکھی بہنا، تجھ کو بیمار نے بلایا ہے، وعدہ صغرا کا کیوں بلا ڈالا، غم میں دل سے لگاؤں میں کیسے، غم یہ دل سے لگاؤں میں کیسے، تیرا لاشا اٹھاؤں میں کیسے اکبر، میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر، میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر، میرا سحر والا اکبر۔ بھائی بہنوں کے ہیں عجب رشتہ، جس کا ثانی کہیں نہیں ملتا، رو کے صغرا نے یہ لکھا اکبر، ایک دکھیا کی لاج رکھ لینا، مر گیا تو بتاؤں میں کیسے، مر گیا تو بتاؤں میں کیسے، تیرا لاشا اٹھاؤں میں کیسے اکبر، میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر، میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر، میرا سحر والا اکبر۔ لطف جینے میں اب کہاں اکبر، دل سے اٹھی ہے یہ فغاں اکبر، سب سے عاشور دی تھی جو تو نے، خون رلائے گی وہ عزاں اکبر، تیری صورت بلاؤں میں کیسے، تیری صورت بلاؤں میں کیسے، تیرا لاشا اٹھاؤں میں کیسے اکبر
میرا سحر والا اکبر
اکبر
میرا سحر والا
اکبر اکبر
میرا سحر
واہ لاش اکبر پہ شاہ جب پہنچے دل کو ہاتھوں سے تھام کر بولے تیری فرقت نے علی اکبر آگ دل میں میری لگا دی ہے آگ دل کی بجھاؤں میں کیسے آگ دل کی
بجھاؤں میں کیسے
اے تیرا لاشا اٹھاؤں میں کیسے اکبر
میرا سحر والا اکبر اکبر میرا سحر والا
لا اکبر اکبر میرا سحر والا بھائی بہنوں کا ہے عجب رشتہ جس کا ثانی کہیں نہیں ملتا رو کے سگرا نے یہ لکھا اکبر ایک دکھیا کی لاج رکھ لینا مر گیا تو بتاؤں میں کیسے مر گیا تو
بتاؤں میں کیسے
اے تیرا لاشا اٹھاؤں میں کیسے اکبر میرا سحر والا اکبر
میرا سحر والا
اللہ اکبر اکبر
میرا سحر والا
ایسی غربت پہ منہ نہیں موڑو میں ہوں تنہا مجھے نہیں چھوڑو کیا گزرتی ہے باپ کے دل پر غم زدہ دل کو یوں نہیں توڑو اپنی غربت بتاؤں میں کیسے اپنی غربت بتاؤں میں کیسے تیرا لاشا اٹھاؤں میں کیسے اکبر
میرا سحر والا اکبر
اکبر
میرا سحر والا
لا اکبر اکبر میرا سحر والا اکبر یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین
یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے 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 روزہ شبیر پر دوں گا دعا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے ہے جہاں گنج شہیدہ ہے جہاں نہر فرات ہے جہاں گنج شہیدہ ہے جہان رے فرات جس جگہ سید میرا پیاسا رہا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جس جگہ جاگی تھی قسمت حر کی وہ دیکھوں گا میں جس جگہ جاگی تھی قسمت حر کی وہ دیکھوں گا میں آسیوں پر کیسے ہوتی ہے عطا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے اس قدر نادار ہوں ذات سفر کچھ بھی نہیں اس قدر نادار ہوں ذات سفر کچھ بھی نہیں دوش پر اپنے بٹھا کر اے حوالے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جس جگہ عباس کے باپ ذو قلم ہو کر گرے جس جگہ عباس کے باپ ذو قلم ہو کر گرے اس جگہ میں بھی کروں ماتم ذرا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے
ماشاءاللہ جواب
کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے روزہ شبیر پر دوں گا دعا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے
مل کے
کربلا لے چل مجھے دل الجھ کر آ گیا بر چھی میں اکبر کا جہاں دل الجھ کر آ گیا بر چھی میں اکبر کا جہاں دل وہاں میں بھی کروں اپنا فدا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے
ماشاءاللہ
لے چل مجھے جل گئے شام غریبا میں جہاں خیمے تمام جل گئے شام غریبا میں جہاں خیمے تمام جس جگہ ننا سا ایک جھولا جلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے
ماشاءاللہ
کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے ہائے وہ مقتل جہاں باپ لی سکینہ رات میں ہائے وہ مقتل جہاں باپ لی سکینہ رات میں ڈھونڈتی پھرتی تھی سینہ باپ کا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا 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 لے چل مجھے روضہ شبیر پر دوں گا دعا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے جانے والے کربلا کے کربلا لے چل مجھے یا فاطمہ زہرا 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 ماشاء اللہ یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا جیو یا فاطمہ زہرا 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 امت نے بہت آپ کو تڑ پایا ہے بی بی ہر حق کے لیے آپ کو ترسایا ہے بی بی غاصب نے جو دربار میں بلوایا ہے بی بی اس دکھ سے لرزنے لگا خود عرش خدا کا آیا فاطمہ زہرا آیا فاطمہ زہرا یا 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 فاطمہ زہرا شبیر کی دنیا میں ولادت سے بھی پہلے کہتی تھی یہ زہرا کہ بہت سہتی ہوں صدمے بچہ یہ میرا کوکھ میں بے چین بہت ہے بچہ میرا کہتا ہے کہ اماں میں ہوں پیاسا آیا فاطمہ زہرا آیا فاطمہ زہرا آیا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا ماں کھانا کھلاتی ہے تو پھر کھاتی ہے بچے جاتی ہے جہاں ماں وہی آ جاتی ہے بچے بن ماں کے کبھی چین نہیں پاتے ہیں بچے کام آتا ہے بچوں پہ بہت ماں کا سہارا آیا فاطمہ زہرا آیا فاطمہ زہرا یا 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 فاطمہ زہرا سینے میں ازل سے ہی میرے کرب و بلا ہے جاتے ہوئے زہرا نے یہ دنیا سے کہا ہے کیا شام میں ہونا ہے یہ سب مجھ کو پتا ہے تپتے ہوئے صحرا میں ہے شبیر کا لاشا آیا فاطمہ زہرا آیا فاطمہ زہرا آیا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا دنیا سے چلی کہتی ہوئی بنت پیمبر غم کرب و بلا کا ہے لیے یہ دل مضطرب آتا ہے تصور میں میرے شام کا منظر اللہ رکھے زینب و کلثوم کا پردہ آیا فاطمہ زہرا آیا فاطمہ زہرا یا 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 فاطمہ زہرا ماں سے عزاداروں کی زہرا نے کہا ہے عاشور کے مقصد کا بھرم تم نے رکھا ہے بچوں کو عزاداری پر قربان کیا ہے محشر میں چکاؤں گی میں قرضہ یہ تمہارا آیا فاطمہ زہرا آیا فاطمہ زہرا آیا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا یا فاطمہ زہرا وہ عابد بیمار تھا وہ عابد بیمار تھا چلنے سے جو لاچار تھا چلنے سے جو لاچار تھا اور شام کا بازار تھا اور شام کا بازار تھا اور مصطفیٰ کی بیٹیاں مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین 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 شبیر کی وہ لاڈلی شبیر کی وہ لاڈلی سینے پہ جو شاہ کے پلی سینے پہ جو شاہ کے پلی ہو جس کی ابا بن میں جلی جس کی ابا بن میں جلی منہ پر تماچوں کے نشان مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین 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 او پیاسے گلے خنجر چلے پیاسے گلے خنجر چلے چادر چنی خیمے جلے چادر چنی خیمے جلے ہو عباس کے پرچم تلے عباس کے پرچم تلے رو کر کہے یہ بی بیا غازی با وفا یا عباس یا عباس غازی با وفا یا عباس یا عباس غازی با وفا یا عباس 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 یا عباس